Greetings, urban farmers, gardeners, and healthy food visionaries. Greg Peterson here, and welcome to the 277th episode of the Urban Farm Podcast, where 3 days a week we work together educating and inspiring you to become part of your food revolution. Raising farm animals in your backyard is not just rewarding, it's actually easier than you think, especially if you have Kari Spencer to help get you prepared. Just text chickens to 33444 or visit backyardanimals.com and you will receive our free webinar on how to raise chickens, goats, and more, promote biodiversity, and put your backyard animals to work. Today on our podcast, we have someone who traded in an unsatisfying job for a much more satisfying role in the food revolution. Let's talk to Joseph Martinez about his microgreens. Joseph is the co-founder of Arizona Microgreens, an urban farm in Phoenix which produces microgreens for restaurants, schools, and individuals throughout the state. Using a DIY approach for starting small and growing incrementally, Joseph and his brother built their startup from a 200 square foot self-built greenhouse to a social enterprise model operating out of a 13,000 square foot greenhouse. Initially focused on fine dining, Arizona Microgreens is now producing microgreens for farm-to-school programs, naturopathic clinics, and a much broader range of diverse customers. Welcome to the show today, Joseph.
Hi, Greg. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at now?
Cool. So the beginning is kind of a little slippery for me. You know, there's a couple of different beginning points for Arizona Microgreens. I could think about 2013 when we first started, or maybe a couple of years earlier when I was dissatisfied with my job. But even going earlier, back in high school, I would take breaks. I would take summer breaks and stuff like that, and go woofing on organic farms all around the world. And then even earlier than that, I remember when I was 13, 14, there was this weird guy offering these fruit tree permaculture workshops at a coffee shop down the street from the house I grew up in.
Oh my gosh, really?
It was you, Greg. It was a younger you.
There you go.
So that there are a couple beginnings, and sometimes it's always a pleasure to be asked to kind of tell the story, because it puts me back in a place where I'm not quite sure exactly where it began. Where the proverbial seeds were planted for the work that I'm doing today.
Right.
So I will just say briefly that I had an interest growing up in food and food production, but I didn't quite nail it down specifically what about food production was interesting to me. So I started going woofing, which for your listeners are probably aware already of woof, but
say
it's
more about that.
Worldwide opportunities on organic farms, or willing workers on organic farms. Tremendous organization for people, really diverse range of people. It's a great way to get involved with all aspects of food production. You could go volunteer in a farm in your state. You could travel out of the country. You could go with your whole family and go live on a farm for months to a year.
Wow.
As a volunteer.
Right.
It's a fantastic organization. Would definitely recommend it to people to look it up. So what I started doing in high school was going and volunteering on a bunch of different types of farms. Everything from a coffee plantation in Hawaii to kind of a more radical permaculture project in Belgium to more indigenous-driven projects in Ecuador. So I felt insatiable, my desire to learn about organic food production, but very unfocused, extremely
well,
unfocused.
You were young.
Yeah. So I was just dabbling, but you know what? It was one of these unfortunate things where I had this tremendous but unfocused interest, and it ended up just kind of, by the time I got into college, it kind of went nowhere. I didn't do anything, I didn't study anything food related. And after college, I ended up getting an office job. A job where I sit in front of a computer all day, and I'm working on press releases and organizing events that just has nothing to do with all of that energy that I had the years prior related to food, organic food production. So I found myself in a little bit of a place of mourning, And I think maybe this is something...
Sadness?
Yeah, some sadness, and I think that maybe this is something your listeners can relate to, when you have this tremendous passion, but it's not focused enough. So it's just kind of this thing that it gets you up in the morning. It excites you to save up money and travel overseas and be a part of something or study something. But
what do you do with it?
Yeah, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
You don't have the thread. You don't have anything that pulls it together. So the second you come back home, you're right back there in that same job.
Well, you know what gets you there, and this is metaphorically speaking, of course, what gets you there is gray hair.
Is that right?
Yeah, well, it's the experience, right?
Yeah.
You start experimenting. So when I was younger, I probably had 30 different jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, I lasted 2 minutes on one job. I lasted 2 hours on one job. And I'd last 6 months or 2 years on other jobs. But each one of those experiences for me was, yay, okay, I like that. Or, on the 2-minute one was in a phone, one of those phone calling centers. And it was like, oh, yeah, no, I can't do that. That's just not part of me.
No.
So, but each one of those experiences molds who we are.
Sure, but then there at the same rate, there can be this tremendous self-disappointment that comes with wanting to be molded, wanting to become this person, and then you come back home and you still don't have it. You don't clearly know the next step. Okay, so I went and volunteered on organic farms in Europe, but now I come back to Arkansas and I'm just back at my old job. It didn't translate.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something I connect with a lot with my peers. They make these tremendous efforts to go start something, be a part of a nonprofit, be part of something, but it doesn't translate back into their life. And I think a lot of people get stuck there. All
right, so here's a question for you. How'd you get unstuck? What was the unstuck piece?
Yeah, I think this is really the juicy part. For me, it happened quite unexpectedly. Long story short, essentially, I knew that I wanted to get unstuck, but the problem was I knew that if I ever had any easy route, I would just take that. So what I had to do, and I'll be more specific, but what I essentially had to do was take every easy option out of the picture, so that I had to start from scratch and get back to, okay, if I am actually starting from scratch and I want a little bit of integrity, what does that look like? So, you know what? Basically, let's get really specific. This means I moved home. So I was living in Istanbul, in Turkey, a tremendously fascinating city. Had on paper what was quite a good job and a good life situation, but was extremely unhappy with it. And more so, I was unhappy with the trajectory and how, looking at that trajectory, it had none of those elements of what the younger version of me was yearning for. The younger version of me was going out on all these journeys and travels, looking for these pieces and insights and meeting these characters and individuals. And I desperately wanted that to translate back into my life, to be incorporated into my livelihood. And here I am sitting in this nice position and looking at the trajectory, and there's none of that. And that was very disappointing to me. So what I essentially ended up doing was I moved home. I moved back to Phoenix, Arizona, where I had no friends and basically no more connections. I hadn't been to that city in many years. And I went to live out of a bedroom that my mom was nice enough to let me live in for a couple months. And that's a great way of doing it. Take your ego all the way down. Go live in your mom's house. And start from zero, and then rebuild it from there.
Great. So then there's a spark that happened when you're there, because I've seen pictures of your first greenhouse.
Yeah.
Get me to that point.
Yeah. So that was very unexpected. So I moved back home to Phoenix, but I didn't really know what the next step was going to be. I was there for a couple weeks, and then my brother and I had the opportunity. He was finishing up some woodworking projects. I was kind of helping him out. And then we found this restaurant in town that had a little bit of space behind it.
Oh. And
we pitched to them this idea, super idealistic, naive, but that was way juicier than the trajectory I was on. We pitched to them this naive idea, why don't we build a greenhouse behind your restaurant? And they said, fine, why not? And both my brother and I, we have an interest in architecture and design, as well as in food and food production.
Right.
So that was it. I mean, we really started from scratch. We drove my mom's car to Home Depot and picked up like $110 in supplies, and that was a
Right.
lot of money. I mean, my brother
yeah.
David and I were looking under the mattresses and stuff for quarters, and yeah, it was $110 was the amount of money we started out with.
Great. What month and year was that?
That was like middle of 2013.
Middle of 2013,
Yeah.
and this is middle of 2017.
That's right.
So 4 years later.
It's amazing how much has happened in 4 years.
Yeah. So tell me, what's the picture look like now?
So what we were able to build with that initial money was like a glorified shack, 200 square foot wood shack covered in basically like plastic wrap. But you know what? It got it going. I mean, we watered everything by hand. We did not have anyone working for us. We were borrowing our mom's car and riding our bicycles to the greenhouse. Oh man, I mean, we had no idea what we were doing. Today, we're operating out of a 13,000 square foot professionally built greenhouse. We work with all of the leading produce distributors in the state of Arizona.
Wow.
We do a couple farmers markets. We work with naturopathic clinics. We work with school districts to get our product into classrooms, K through 12 classrooms. It's pretty exciting, man. It's really come a long way from a 200 square foot shack behind a vegan restaurant.
Yeah. So for our listeners that don't know, tell us what microgreens are.
Yeah, so 4 years ago, I had no idea what microgreens were. My brother and I, we knew we wanted to build a greenhouse, and it was actually quite naive. Like, we didn't really know why or what exactly we were going to build, but we had this idea that, if you build a greenhouse, you can grow things inside. That was all we had.
Right.
That was absolutely all we had. And we built the greenhouse. And, the part of Phoenix that we were in, there's not that much going on. So you build a greenhouse, people are going to come around and start asking questions about it. So we had some chefs who came by, and they said, "Oh, you guys are going to grow things for restaurants." And we said, "Yeah, we could do that. What do you guys want?" And they said, "Don't grow lettuces.
Right.
Way too much of that right now.
Right.
Don't grow basil. We can get it real cheap, and we don't need better basil. You could grow tomatoes, but you'd have to really know what you were doing to grow good enough tomatoes that we'd buy them. Maybe you should try growing microgreens." And I was just like, "Micro what? Like, what is that?" And they basically ticked off the list of all the things that I wanted to grow. So
Oh, nice.
I felt very diminished because I was like, I really thought I was going to grow lettuces, basils, and tomatoes.
Right.
And here they are saying, don't do that.
Right.
But at least I wasn't stubborn enough that I didn't listen to them. And they said, grow microgreens. So I just, I did what you can do nowadays. You just go online and you spend a couple days.
On
and by
YouTube.
The end, on every website you can find.
Yeah.
And by the end of the weekend, I mean, you know enough to get started. So essentially, microgreens, I had no idea when we first started what microgreens were. We built the greenhouse, and some chefs came by. They saw that we were building the greenhouse, and they said, don't grow lettuces, don't grow basils, don't grow tomatoes. What we really need here in Phoenix right now are microgreens. I still had no idea what that was. They said, just look it up, figure it out, get us some microgreens.
Oh, nice.
So,
and this is what I tell people all the time when they want to start growing for markets. The best thing to do, a great place to start, is just contact your local chefs, see what they want you to grow, and then grow that.
Absolutely. Really, I know. I mean, I'm not really in a position where I'm giving out advice to people, but I would absolutely pick that up as a piece of advice.
Yeah.
Greg, I can't tell you how many people I know who get so excited about growing food. They even raise the money, go into debt, build a facility, and they grow something that it's just not needed.
Nobody wants. Yeah.
No
or
one
it's
wants
super
it.
cheap.
And you can't. What are you going to do? You can't convince people to eat lettuce. You can't cram it. You can't push it into the market. And,
what you're looking for is a specialty crop. Specialty crops sell for more. Like, so a bag of microgreens per pound, what do you sell it for ish?
I mean, it depends. It could be anywhere from $20 to $60 per pound. Yeah.
A pound.
Now, it does take a lot of inputs to grow.
Absolutely.
A pound,
Absolutely.
But more importantly, more important than the dollar value is, are you going to have a market for it? Because it doesn't matter if it's high dollar value, but there's no market for it.
Right.
So is anyone going to buy locally produced saffron? No,
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So don't go out and produce it. Don't just look at the most expensive items and say, why don't I grow that?
So it sounds to me like the takeaway is you need to figure out what your buyers want.
Exactly. And it was absolute blessing. We knew nothing about business. We had no mentors, and we were given the most important piece of the puzzle. It was just given to us in the beginning because these chefs came and they said, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Do exactly this, and I will buy it. We're in business. We're in business before we even had a business.
Listeners, best way to start a business is be in business before you even start a business. Have a market for it.
Yeah, I had this funny moment where we just started growing these microgreens, and I'll tell you very shortly what they are. But we started growing them, and we had these chefs from a nearby fine dining restaurant. We thought they were hanging out with us in the greenhouse. And then one week, this guy comes back and he goes, hey, Joseph, could you send me the invoice for that order last week? And I said, the invoice for what? And that's when I realized, we're in business.
Yeah.
I mean, really, I thought I was just hanging out. We were just clipping some product, putting it in bags, and giving it to them. It really it felt so natural. I was doing something that they needed. They needed me. And they were giving me, at first, they were, repaying me in the feedback and the coaching.
Yep.
And then it came time to send them an invoice. And then the next week, the guy said, hey, could you shoot me over the availability? I said, what?
Yeah, exactly.
So you go step by step. So let me tell you real quickly what microgreens are. They're basically herbs and vegetables grown for just a few weeks. So for any gardener out there, who started plants from seed, you know that you plant the seed, you see them germinate, and they pop up, and usually they're going to open up the first 2 leaves.
Right.
And those are often the leaves that are actually part of the seed itself.
Right.
So those are the cotyledon leaves.
Yes, perfect.
So on a sunflower seed, the cotyledon leaves are actually the 2 halves of that seed. And then a few days later, you're going to start to notice a next set of leaves. These are called the true leaves, developing just out of the middle. Now, a microgreen is harvested precisely at the stage where that set of true leaves is just starting to develop. You can grow arugula microgreens, broccoli, cabbage, dill, fenugreek,
beets,
cilantro, onion, but also several different types of beets. Detroit dark red, bull's blood, Rubens. So it gets even deeper, types of radishes. We grow about 3 different radishes. We grow 4 different mustards.
Wow.
So it doesn't get boring at all. So people, you might have gardeners say, well, why would you do that? Why would you eat the plant before it fully develops?
You know what? You're psychedelic. I was just going to ask you that. It's like, tell us about that.
So there's a couple reasons for this. Back in the 90s in the U.S., chefs were using microgreens as garnishes. So you'd go into a fine dining restaurant and they would harvest a little bit of micro radish and plate it. So this is your kind of high-end cuisine where someone goes to a restaurant and there's just a couple leaves on the plate and they eat it and they go, oh, wow, the radish greens taste like radish. So very much this kind of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory moment where the snozberries taste like snozberries. So they have this tremendous flavor to them. A very, very little bit has a ton of flavor, and it tastes exactly like the full-grown counterpart. So for fine dining chefs, they like playing with this. You can have these 2 little leaves on a plate, and they taste like sunflower. And then you can kind of play with that with customers and developing a plate. So microgreens, the reason we harvest them when they're so young, it started out in the 90s. Fine dining chefs were using them as a garnish because they have tremendously powerful flavors. And they look quite nice the way that they can be plated on a dish. And you'll also see this in Japanese and Korean cuisine. If you've ever been to Japan or Korea, they put microgreens on everything, especially on raw fish. It's quite flavorful, powerful. But the other thing that started to happen was that rumors were starting to circulate that they might be more nutritious.
I was going to say there's a nutrient density thing going on here, right?
Yeah. And then out of these rumors, the USDA, starting in the 2000s, they started actually doing, trials, basically testing, well, if you grow these plants in these ways, or if you grow them over in these ways, how is that going to affect the nutrient density of these plants? And, they were not paid by any big microgreen grower or anything like that. I talked to some of the researchers, actually, and they said that they were expecting that there would be little to no nutrient properties in these plants at all. They thought they would be pretty empty nutritionally, and were totally surprised to find that sometimes they were 20 or 40 times more nutrient dense in certain chemical compounds than the full-grown counterpart. So out of this research that was now being legitimized by the USDA and other academic research partners in the US, it started to happen globally. You see researchers in Europe, even in Asia, doing really scientific evidence-based work and finding that microgreens are in fact more nutrient dense. And furthermore, you got nutritionists who in the game, and they were studying it and finding that microgreens were also more basically bioavailable. The nutrients were more bioavailable, so we could digest them and absorb them more readily.
Right.
So this is pretty crazy. So what this sets up in kind of the early 2000s, we're getting around like 2012 now, is that microgreens are on the one hand a perfect product for the fine dining industry, and they're also a perfect product for people who are interested in the most nutrient dense produce they can find. And these customer segments are very much alive and well in certain parts of the country. We just happen to be Arizona Microgreens at one of those places. So this is one of those right places at the right time, and then keeping your ears open and people telling you what they need and you following that.
So is there any chance, because you've been at this now for 4 years, is there any chance that you drove that industry and you drove the education around it?
In some ways, but I think in a huge respect, Greg, we are indebted to the people, especially in the Arizona area, for decades before us, who were really out there making the case for local foods. I have such an easy job now. I walk into a restaurant and I say, "Hey, I'm Joseph. I'm with Arizona Microgreens," and the chef goes, "I know who you guys are. I've been waiting to meet you. I want to meet you. I want to use local food.
Yeah.
Let's just figure it out." So, I mean, Greg, I inherited this absolute joy where all I have to do is just work out the logistics, work out the availability, look at the menu. I mean, the second I meet a chef here, they're so receptive. And it wasn't that way, I mean, even like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. People, they didn't really see the value in local.
Right.
Now, a lot of them, they see it. They're so busy. They got to get to work, and they got to say, okay, well, let's figure this out. Where can we put it on the menu? How can we make it work? Let's make it work. Let's make something happen. So people are just very proactive, ready to make something happen, and we're really happy to be a part of that.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So I noticed in your bio, there's something up here that says a social enterprise model. Tell me about what that is, because that's really fascinating.
Yeah, so for me, a lot of what I found unsatisfactory about the work I was doing prior to this, my office job, was that it wasn't consistent with my ideas of right livelihood, really. I feel really grateful that the work I do, I feel is much more integrity with that, and essentially my understanding of the social enterprise model, it's actually quite easily transferable to anyone in food production. We're in a privileged position that we can have quite naturally a positive environmental, social, and economic impact. If we're out there producing eyeglasses, it's a little bit harder. You start having to set up auxiliary networks or giving a percentage of your money away. And for Arizona Microgreens, it's incorporated into how we operate. So basically at the greenhouse, every aspect of our production, we do anything we can to mitigate our negative environmental impact. So if I have runoff water, that runoff water is being used either with fruit trees or with kind of a native plant habitat and producing a pollinator garden. We basically are leasing this greenhouse space, and that lease goes to a community school that's run by a public school district.
Wow.
So they're doing tremendous work. I mean, when we have giant compost piles and our compost, we do not reuse it in our production. because of a number of reasons, but essentially we found that we could have a greater impact by actually being a source of donating that to community garden groups. And
the leftover soil.
Exactly. So we actually produce in organic soil, and then we harvest our microgreens, and that leftover soil gets thrown in a big compost pile. Greg, our compost pile is like 30 cubic yards.
Oh my
God. It's massive, and it is the most beautiful compost you've ever seen. It doesn't smell. It's tremendous. I mean, you stick your hands into this stuff and you pull them out. It's dark, rich, amazing soil. And we donate that to nonprofits that are doing community gardens on formerly vacant lots throughout South Phoenix, which is the part of town that we operate in.
Right.
Greg, it's amazing. It's like a little bubble. I mean, it's such a bubble, the greenhouse, but it's such a happy place for a lot of people. We really do our best to treat our employees great. It's been amazing. I get feedback from some of our employees about how their lifestyle changes the longer they work with us.
Nice.
Just healthier work habits. We're all very much into kind of being very physically active, eating very well. That's a tremendous thing. Microgreens, they make up about like 50-60% of my diet, Greg.
Oh, nice.
And it's something really cool. I mean, you can probably connect with this as well. When you grow that much of your own food, I personally grow like 60% of what I eat, and I personally know the farmers who grow the rest.
Yeah.
There's a great feeling in that. And it's amazing to have, it's a small crew, but to have a couple employees and some interns and volunteers and people who join us with that. And it's beautiful to see them get healthier the longer they work with us.
Right.
And that's the dream. The former work I had, the former job, I felt, and I'm sure your listeners can relate to this, if you have this kind of job, every day you go there, you die a little bit inside.
Yeah.
And what we've created at Arizona Microgreens is an environment where every day you go there, you get healthier, you feel stronger. It's like rehabilitation.
That is truly epic.
So maybe that's social enterprise for me. It's thinking about doing a for-profit endeavor that rehabilitates your life and invites other people to join in that, rehabilitates communities, has a positive impact, and doesn't just fade away if the funding dries up.
Right.
If funding channel dries up for Arizona Microgreens, we find a new one or we create a new one.
Right.
And we've been growing every month. We grow. But it's a sustainable growth. It's a slow and steady growth.
So I know you do this really cool project here, and I have yet to be able to dive in and eat some of your food from it. But what is contemplative gastronomy?
Wow. So this, for me, Greg, this is such an unexpected moment. I'll be very brief with the story. A big upside to the work that I do, Greg, is that I have this mandatory vacation that I have to take during the summertime. We slow down so much that, we work, 7 days a week the rest of the year, but then we have a good summer pause. So last summer, I went to Iceland. And I went there actually to work with an artist. I wanted to do something unrelated to my work, just kind of pull my head out of my little bubble and do something very different. So I met this artist, and Greg, it was amazing. It was like when you meet those people who just excite tons of energy in you, and I felt like we were just, having endless conversations that just lasted days. And then it dawned on me, actually, that is what was happening, because in Iceland, in the middle of July, the sun doesn't go down.
Right.
So you go out to the bar and you're out for drinks, and then all of a sudden they just come around and they have a pot of coffee.
Right.
It's nonstop. And for someone like me and for someone like you, you can have 2, 3, 4 days of this, and then you're going to crash.
Oh, yeah.
If you haven't slept in 4 days, you just crash. And so it was fun. I'm in this small town, Seyðisfjörður, there in Iceland, working with this artist. But, Greg, what starts happening is that I'm not sleeping anymore. The sun not setting, I just, I can't fall asleep.
Messes with your circadian rhythm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And people say, oh, just get an eye mask or just get blackout curtains. It's not as simple as that. It's like your body knows that the sun is up and it's out there.
Oh, yeah.
So I couldn't fall asleep. So what really aggravated me, though, Greg, was not the sleeplessness, but I no longer felt present. I no longer felt awake and in the present moment. So what I started doing was basically doing like DIY mindfulness practices. You know, I would jump into freezing cold water. I would go on these very long runs. I would do these different meditation techniques because I was losing my grip on reality. And talk to any mental health professional, they'll tell you that sleeplessness, you know, it results in kind of mental issues. And this is what was coming up for me. And one day I walked into a restaurant and I said, why don't I try to do a mindfulness exercise with food? So I wrote down 5 words on a piece of paper. I always bring a piece. Greg can see I have a piece of paper and a pen with me right now.
By the way, everybody, Joseph's in studio today, if you haven't figured that out.
And so I brought this piece of paper and I wrote 5 words. I said, look, smell, remember, taste, feel. And I said, for every bite of this meal, I will do these 5 steps for about 5 seconds each. So they drop the first plate. And I take up my fork and I put it in the bite and I bring it closer and I just look at it for 5 seconds.
Oh my gosh.
And then I bring it closer and I smell. And I just notice the smells. And then I let myself kind of drift and say, are there any memories that are coming up for me? And then I finally take a bite. And then I feel the food as it enters my body, as it's kind of like going down my throat. Is it sour, or is there like is there a fattiness? It goes straight to my stomach. It's really literally becoming part of me. So checking in with that before going to the next bite. So I'm doing this process, and Greg, I laughed out loud twice during this meal. Obviously, I was eating by myself in this restaurant. I really laughed out loud.
Oh my gosh, what did they think of you?
Oh yeah, definitely people are, come on, I'm definitely making a scene. I'm sitting there like smelling my food and taking an epically long time.
Right.
And then I actually, there was a moment, Greg, where I was really moved to tears. I'm sitting in this restaurant in Seyðisfjörður in Iceland, just crying, eating my food and crying. But what happened, Greg, is I walked out of that restaurant, and for the first time in a month of being in Iceland, I felt awake and alive and present again. It was like magic. I'll never forget looking up at the fjord and seeing this little pink light in the sky and the snow on top of the fjord mountains and the village. And I just walked around that night. Of course, it's bright out and it's midnight.
Right.
I walk around the village and every detail came out in just startling beauty. I mean, I was like running my hand over the railing and smelling the grass, and I wasn't high at all, Greg. I felt just very much awake. So what we did is I came back to Phoenix, I partnered with a chef, and we started this pop-up dining series. It fits perfectly with Arizona Microgreens. We basically source food from other local farms, our kind of peers, our partners, so other organic farms, and we put together these stunning, amazing, like 6-course meals, and we invite guests to go through this guided mindfulness process with the food.
Wow.
So it's not really like directly Arizona Microgreens. You know, we don't do it there at the greenhouse. It's basically a project that we offer now kind of out in the world.
You going to do it again this coming year?
Yeah, so we're going to do it this fall, and we're going to partner. We haven't yet announced it, but we're going to partner with a local hotel, and they have a tremendous restaurant, and the chef there is very passionate about local food. His wife is very much into mindfulness practices. So again, it's kind of like going back to when Arizona Microgreens started. We were at this great intersection of kind of fine dining and wellness. And in a way, this is kind of just a variation off of that. You have a lot of these fine dining chefs. They're passionate about local food. And then you have a lot of these wellness people, wellness customers who are also
passionate about their health.
They're passionate about their health, but they're also interested in this thing called mindfulness, you know? And it's been an incredible kind of unexpected turn in my journey to be able to facilitate that and offer that with people. It's really beautiful. I hope you can join. I hope your listeners can come to Scottsdale, come to Phoenix, and join us for one of these dinners. They're called Savor, SAVOR, and the kind of second line, the byline, I guess, is Contemplative Gastronomy.
Nice. ArizonaMicrogreens.com/savor. You can find more about it there. So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Yeah, so just very briefly, I think one of the things that we failed at pretty early on was making a plan for our next steps forward. We basically, when we were first initially outgrowing our 200 square foot space, or 200 square foot greenhouse, we made a plan to partner up with a nonprofit that was doing a project on a formerly vacant lot. So you're going to see a lot of entrepreneurs out there related to food systems that don't have any money or capital or resources. So they end up moving into these temporary use spaces. I used to be a huge fan of these spaces.
Until you talked to me.
And then I actually met Greg Peterson, your host, and I told him, I was very excited. I was like, Greg said, what's the next step for you guys? Oh, Greg, we're moving into this. We're going to build a greenhouse on this temporary space. And Greg was so unenthusiastic. He was so just like, oh, yeah, okay. Like kind of disappointed. And I was really deflated. And I really thought
Sorry about that.
No. I thought that I was very disappointed by Greg's reaction. I wanted him to be more excited about it. And I thought that Greg was wrong. This was going to be a huge success. This is the important thing to do. This is the right step. And it all fell through. I'm not going to say Greg was right, because Greg he just expressed his honest reaction to it. That was like, oh.
Well, and the background there is trying to do something on a property that you really don't have control over. And,
absolutely.
And since then, that particular property has gone away.
In a tremendously short period of time. So just to give some background for your viewers very briefly, it was a temporary use space that essentially was extremely exciting to be a part of, but there was a line there that said you could basically be evicted in 90 days notice.
Yep.
Potentially even 30 days in certain circumstances.
Which is what they actually got, was 30 days.
It's exactly what they did.
Yeah.
And we were looking to invest or drop a lot of investment in that space. We would have lost everything. But the lesson that I learned was to not burn bridges and keep your ears open. And what I did was when it was falling through, I just picked up the phone and I called Greg. And I said, hey, buddy, this thing has fallen through. I remember your kind of lack of enthusiasm about it. I wonder if there's something else that you had in mind. Immediately, Greg puts us in touch with some other option. I mean, it was a matter of like a week.
Oh, that's right. It was fast.
It was very fast, and we were walking into an empty greenhouse. And Greg said, why build your own greenhouse on land that you don't control when there's one sitting there empty that you guys could walk into and actually probably contribute a lot and turn into something? And it's not going away anytime soon. So I think the lesson there is, people are going to give you advice. Maybe you have to still fail, but don't burn bridges and churn around and see that you're in a network of people who they do want to support you.
Yeah.
Keep your ears open.
And here's the thing. Here's one of my lessons for you is that you listened. You took coaching and you listened. So
be coachable.
Absolutely. So what do you consider your biggest success?
Probably my relationship with my brother. It's tremendous that, we've fought a lot in the early days of Arizona Microgreens, but we persisted and we both have improved as communicators. We've improved as brothers. We've improved as business partners. And that is fundamental. If you're doing a business and you have a partner, work on nurturing that relationship. Yeah, build a great product, build a great service, but build a great relationship
with your team.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Excellent. What drives you?
Craig, this is wonderful that for me, it's actually, I've completely fallen in love with the product that we have with microgreens. And I didn't at first. When I first started, it was, I wanted this certain type of lifestyle, and I was building that. It was, I know what I don't want. I don't want the office job. I don't want the desk. So it was a lifestyle thing.
Right.
And then kind of solved that. And then I wasn't quite sure what was driving me anymore. And I was very lucky that every day I walked in the greenhouse, Greg, I go over there and I touch the microgreens and I look at them and I eat them. I eat them every day for lunch. I had them this morning before I came here for the podcast.
Nice.
I'm just deeply in love with this product. Like I said, it's 60% of my diet. I find a way that it can support mindfulness practices, that it can go into farm to school programs. I feel very lucky that I am just head over heels in love with this product. And I love seeing that. I love seeing growers who are just obsessed with their artichokes, fishermen who just have deepest respect for the fish that they catch. And And that's what drives me right now. This just love for microgreens and wanting to see them impact more and more people. School kids, naturopathic clinics, athletes, everyone. I even brought Greg some microgreens today.
Thank you. I will gladly eat them. So if you could recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be and why?
Yeah, so this book is called Mindfulness and Meaningful Work. The second line is Explorations in Right Livelihood. It's a collection of essays edited by this guy, Claude Whitmire. Just a fantastic book. It's a great, you don't have to read the whole thing. You can just pick and choose.
Read pieces of it, yeah.
Yeah, but it has some really great essays. And I think for anyone, look, you don't have to be starting your own business. I mean, you're a stay-at-home mom, or you're considering dropping out of school, or you're retiring. This question of right livelihood will always be with you. And it's a beautiful selection of essays, mindfulness and meaningful work. And it was pretty illuminating for me.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Excellent. So what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
Along the lines of what we were talking about before, about being coachable, really learn how to listen on a deep level. One of the first kind of, I don't know, you call it like principles or points in permaculture is this observe and interact.
Yep.
And I feel like I've taken some permaculture classes, and this one is always skipped over because everyone shows up and they want to walk out with their charts and their diagrams. Oh, we're going to put fruit trees here and swales here and make berms. No one wants to go to a workshop, a weekend-long workshop, and all they do is observe and interact. But I can tell you, this for me is like such a sacred space of learning on a deep level how to just observe and interact. And I would just, my advice or my suggestion would be for people to let that come alive for them. What does that mean right now in their life? What would that mean to observe and interact be a place of deep presence and profound impact on who they are? Go out in your lawn, go out in your just front yard. It's just lawn, and just sit there and just observe. Feel the heat coming up from the grass. Look at your sprinkler system as it turns on and splashes you in the face. And is this what I want? What is this? What is this about? Or go in the garden you've planted and just watch the insects. It's amazing how much we can learn just from that stage. Before you're going to change anything, just learn to observe and interact. I do it every day. It's absolutely critical for me.
Very contemplative.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Joseph.
Thank you, Greg. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, how can our listeners get a hold of you?
Yeah, so we have a little bit of a social media presence, much to my chagrin. So you can go Facebook, Arizona Microgreens, Instagram, Arizona Microgreens, have a look at what we do, all aspects of what we do. And then, of course, our website, ArizonaMicrogreens.com. Shoot us an email, send us a message on Facebook, comment on one of our photos, reach out. I would love to hear what you guys are doing. If you're growing microgreens, would love to hear what you're doing. I look forward to connecting with you guys.
Cool. You can also find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/AZ microgreens. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast. Raising farm animals in your backyard is not just rewarding, it's actually easier than you think, especially if you have Kari Spencer to help get you prepared. Just text chickens to 33444 or visit backyardanimals.com and you will receive our free webinar on how to raise chickens, goats, and more, promote biodiversity, and put your backyard animals to work.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen 3 days a week for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.